Hi, everybody. I'm Keith Morton, author of the recent book Getting Out Youth Gangs, Violence, and Positive Change. And I want to start out by thanking the Providence Community Libraries for inviting me to talk a little bit about my book. Starting in 2007, I helped run for 8 years a youth program at the Rogers Recreation Center in the Smith Hill neighborhood of Providence with staff from the Nonviolence Institute. And the program, which we called Rec Night, was open to youth from the neighborhood and who the Nonviolence Institute staff worked with. And they just came once a week, spent about 3 hours with us, and we used the relationships that we built to help plug them into a variety of other resources and opportunities around the city and state. After 8 years, we decided to wrap up the program for a variety of reasons. And in 2015, I started trying to capture some of the lessons that we'd learned, and those became what we called Youth Positive. What I want to do is just read a couple of very brief passages from the book that I hope will give you a flavor for it and get you interested enough to either read the book, which would be great, or to come to a book discussion at the Providence Community Libraries once the pandemic has ended. So here's a little bit about a little reflection on the program. A startling insight comes from this perspective. The violence and self-defeating behavior of these youth, however it looks to the outside, express what they believe to be their best options under the circumstances. This is not to say that the gang-involved youth are happy with their situations or their options. They know they're living dangerously, that they are backing into a corner with little room for escape. Even more startling, and what they welcome over and over, is any effort to really understand why they are doing what they are doing. Seeing the world from the point of view of any one of these youth is a complicated exercise in compassion, communication, grief, pride, and fear. In short, the youth invite us to see the world as they do before we judge them, not to condone what is messed up in their lives, but to understand it, and in understanding it, begin to help them figure out how things could get better. This is what I mean by a practical theory of positive change. When we are open to opportunities for dialogue in which we try to explain the truth as each of us sees it, we begin to describe our experiences of the world, explain why things are the way they are, and imagine how they could be changed for the better. Safe space, compassion, contact, constancy, and community. Because it was in collaboration with the Nonviolence Institute, we used nonviolence as the basis for what we did, but we did it without preaching a philosophy, by simply trying to put it into practice and use it as a way to discuss and debate what it was that the youth were involved in their day-to-day lives. So a couple of brief stories. In the spring of 2011, one of the youth I know was arrested for participating in a drive-by shooting. A few days later, I went to visit him at the intake center of Rhode Island's ACI. Visitors pass through a series of checkpoints and walk for several minutes downstairs and hallways to a windowless cafeteria. You check in at another desk and take a seat at a cafeteria table. The prisoner you are visiting enters through a door at the opposite end of the room and joins you. "You're disappointed in me, huh?" Jamal asked as he gave me a hug. After checking in a bit on other people, he told me a version of what had happened that night. His friend Peter had wanted to drive by some people from a gang in another neighborhood of Providence and shoot at them. It was part of a conflict that went back years and had heated up recently. Peter asked Jamal to support him. Jamal said no, then yes. He told me, "I was thinking of you, thinking how to be nonviolent. I went along and offered to be the shooter. I fired one shot into the ground and then pretended the gun had jammed. It was the best I could think of to make sure no one got hurt. Then the police flashed on us. We tried to run and they caught us." I told him I believed him, but doubted anyone else would. He said Peter would back up his story. So was Jamal practicing nonviolence? Violence? Both? On another occasion, I was driving with 5 13 to 14-year-old boys to pick up pizza for rec night. They were talking about a fight that had happened just after school that day. A kid they knew had been confronted by 3 other youth and threatened with physical violence in front of a gathering crowd. Three others, all juniors in a local gang, stepped in with the youth who was on his own and faced down the aggressors, who swore a little and then left. The youth in my truck were excited. He must be a junior in this crew. Did you see how they got his back? I'd like somebody to have my back like that. They told stories of times that would have been useful. I asked them, do you like to fight? A lot? No, of course not, they said. They explained that it was a way of being safe, of not fighting. I asked, how many people in that crew do you think? Maybe 15, 20? So every time one of them has a beef, everyone in the crew has to get his back. And part of being in a gang is that someone always has a beef. So you join for security, but you end up always fighting. You have to like fighting to be successful in a gang. They considered this and thought they could fight if they had to. I asked, you willing to use weapons? Because you're small and not very strong yet, and if you have to go up against people older than you, bigger than you, and the other side might have weapons, you'll need everything to even it up in either case. Before you sign up, you might want to think, you want to fight a lot? You willing to use weapons and hurt other people? Do you see any alternatives? The conversation ended as we arrived at the pizza place. On the way back to the rec center, they cranked a rap station and sang along. While the details varied, this kind of conversation was pretty regular occurrence. Was it about violence, nonviolence, both? These examples, unique in their particulars but not their logic, capture something of the cognitive, ethical, spiritual, and strategic space in which youth involved with gang and street violence pursue the study and practice of nonviolence. What is our relationship to violence? What do we believe about it? And what do we learn when we start to pay attention to the evidence it offers? What are the alternatives? The answers, if they are to be meaningful, have to be that choosing nonviolence will give you more power, more choices, and more opportunities to do more of what is meaningful to you. Thanks for listening, and I hope we'll get opportunities to talk again. Bye-bye.